There are many of you, and some of you, don't even know what Stonewall Inn is. And Stonewall was a gay bar on Christopher Street in New York. When people were gay or outed, when someone said that person is a gay, they were fired, harassed, sometimes killed, for following a different footstep and taking a different direction than people thought they should. What was going on in New York was just a small sample of what was going on all around the world. They had bars that were owned by the mafia, and they treated their patrons as below second-class citizens. If you were a gay man or woman at that period in time, if you weren't wearing 3 pieces of clothing that identified you as the gender that was on your driver's license, you could be taken to jail.
Wow.
Not only were you taken to jail, your name and picture was put in the newspaper, which then meant that your family disowned you, and you lost your job. So this was going on at the same time the blacks were being very persecuted in the South. We were having 2 different groups, just about absolutely sick and tired of being treated exactly opposite of what we were guaranteed in the Constitution. They were treated like not being human. And the thing with the gay community in New York at that time is if you were of color, you got a double whammy.
Yep.
You automatically were treated worse than anybody else. And they have, if any of you are interested in Stonewall, I believe KQED has it on again this coming Thursday night at 8 o'clock. And it's amazing. When you see this, you think, wow, they're beating people and they're hitting people and they're stuffing them in paddy wagons. And the only reason is because they are not following the lifestyle that the ruling group felt that they should. Many of you were born after that. You have no idea what it was like. But talk to people who are in their 70s or in their 80s about what it was like. The minute that they knew they were going to have a police raid, you had to step out. If you were dancing, you had to step back. If you were touching another person of the same gender, you automatically were arrested. If you were dancing when they walked in and you were too close, they had to be able to shine a flashlight between the 2 of you and see the beam on the other wall, or you were put in a paddy wagon. And the women were taken into another room and looked at by a female matron if you were lucky. What they found was a lot of times it was a male that was having the woman take off the clothes so they could make sure that they had 3 pieces of female articles of clothing on.
Oh.
This became so bad that people were wanting to do something about it, but they didn't know what to do. So, 50 years ago, this weekend, they had a group. It was a hot night in New York, and a lot of people had come back from mourning the fact that Judy Garland had passed. And so they got into the bar. Now this bar took cheap liquor, put it in really important and exciting looking bottles, and charged 5 times the fee. But it was the only place that gay and lesbian folks could go to be together. Other than that, it was so isolated. So they would pay that amount of money. Well, what happened is the light went on, bing, 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 were being raided by the cops. The cops would usually come by 2 or 3 times a night for a roundup, laughing hysterically. They thought it was so funny to see these people scatter like chickens. And they have all of this on film. They would come in with their batons ready because these were criminals, because they were here enjoying themselves. And what would happen is that immediately they'd take your ID. If you didn't have your ID, you were arrested for being obviously underage if you didn't have an ID. So it was one of those things that just gathering was such a problem. So here, they started rounding people up. Well, there are many people who say who started it, but they are in agreement that it was a very butch lesbian who said, I'm not taking this. No, and a few other choice words about, I'm not getting in that paddy wagon. No. And so they hit her. Well, some of the brothers there said, no, you're not going to do this. And then they started saying no. And they started rounding them up, and it started like any good fight. Everybody was getting upset. And 5 guys, which they said really aggravated them, made a line like the Rockettes and started singing a song. We're men who wear curls, we just think we're one of the girls, and they were doing high kicks. Well, that seemed to aggravate them more than the resistance, because they were being made fun of, and that group went too. But it was amazing how many people of color ended up in the paddy wagon, and how many white men were hassled but not taken in. But as they were doing this, and they were thinking this was kind of good fun, they're teasing the police started getting angry. And the angrier they got, the more a crowd started to gather around, throwing pennies at them. And they said 2 different reasons. One, because pennies are made of copper, and these are coppers. The other, that because it's all about money. This bar is all about money. And so they said even some of them warmed up the pennies before they threw them at them. I mean, imagine being pelted by hot coins, So it wasn't very dangerous, but it really, really provoked the police. And the more they started swinging, finally the crowd started getting bigger and bigger, because Christopher Street was about the only place where they had a huge contingency of gay folks living. And so they heard, they're attacking our bar. And they all started coming out on this wonderful Saturday night, hot in New York City. And they started chanting and yelling and pushing and fighting, to the point that they outnumbered the police. And the police ran into the bar, or, to get away. And somebody got some lighter fluid and set the bar on fire. Then they ran out. And at that point, it was a melee. And it lasted for 2 days, or 2.5, 3, depending on what you read, that these people were fighting for their rights. They were sick and tired of being treated like second-class citizens. Stonewall is what started the idea that gay people had rights. They'd never seen that before. And it also brought it to the attention of the Congress, their Congress representative, that I've got a heck of a lot of people living in this area, and they're not being represented. And that's what happened. But it took, it took so many years, because then they started fighting for, of all things, equal rights. Equal rights to live a decent life. Equal rights for representation. And equal rights, and it kept moving forward until 2015, when the Supreme Court passed the Gay Marriage Act, and that was signed by President Barack Obama. And when you look back at all of the things that were happening, during that period of time, we had a horrendous plague. Started in the 1970s. They didn't know what was going on. All they knew is that men were getting sick. Most of them were gay men that were getting sick. But they couldn't figure out what was causing it. What was this disease? And nobody paid much attention to it. They just kept saying, oh well, it was the gays. They're the ones getting sick. But that doesn't bother us.
Well, or that they deserve it.
Yeah, and a lot of it was they deserve it. And they had big signs that said, God is retaliating against homosexuality. And
Anita Bryant.
Anita Bryant, and that's what she came out on TV and said, our orange juice woman there, and from Florida. So for those of you who didn't live through this, it was a horrendous time because your friends, your family, everybody was being involved in this, and they kept saying that this is because God hates gays. And they based that on Leviticus, Sodom and Gomorrah. But they didn't base it on other chapters in the Bible. In Samuel, we hear these wonderful things about Jonathan and David. David of David-Goliath fame. David and Jonathan had a wonderful love affair, and it's talked about in the Bible. And it talks about how much they love each other and how many kisses they gave each other. And it says that David and Jonathan loved each other like Adam and Eve. And that's said in the Bible.
Wow.
Okay? And yet that part is ignored. And we have this wonderful thing that is said about how the one section of the Bible is taken out and expanded, and all the others are ignored. The other area that's really beautiful is the book of Ruth, and that's Ruth and Naomi. And the things that they say about Ruth and Naomi, and it talks about no greater love hath anybody as these two women. But there again, even though it says that we have the smallest book in the Bible is the book of Ruth. Okay, but these are all Old Testament. Jesus came out and started saying, wait a minute, you're all God's children. But it was all tinted by what was being said in the first part. And so if you ever want to read anything, read the book of Ruth, because it's so interesting. One of the things that's interesting is Ruth, Naomi's son had a child that they named Orpah, O-R-P-A-H. And Oprah's mother thought that's the way you spelled it, and that's how Oprah got her name. And it was from one of the wonderful people in the Bible. So there's so much that we have that we carry on down. And and when you go back and you look at the people that I'm looking for the list I have here, the people that we know as being these wonderful people, but they were so prejudiced against when they were on the earth because of their homosexuality. And I'm going to start with a few. Charles Lawton, Tennessee Williams, James Baldwin, Andy Warhol, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Herman Melville, Tchaikovsky, Willa Cather, Bessie Smith, Noel Coward, Eleanor Roosevelt. How many of you knew that Eleanor Roosevelt had a gay lover? Yeah, we read about it. It came out that when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was off with whoever his girlfriend was, she also had a girlfriend. And it's very interesting reading, and so look into it. Julius Caesar, Harvey Milk, of course, Queen Anne, Marie Antoinette, Melissa Etheridge, Pope Benedict IX, Elton John, Martina Navratilova, Peter the Great, Langston Hughes, Billie Jean King, Greg Louganis, Barney Frank, Hans Christian Andersen, J. Edgar Hoover, Frida Kahlo, Rock Hudson, Montgomery Clift, Ellen DeGeneres, and her wife Portia, Jane Lynch, Ellen Page, Michael Samms, and now it goes on and on because people are not afraid to come out. And so usually they come out and say, well, I'm sure you all know this, but this is who I am. But the fact that there are so many more in this century, because now there's not this stigma. Because I want to go back to the AIDS epidemic. Once they found out they had an epidemic, they didn't do anything about it. They just kept ignoring it. And men started dying. And then they had a lot of things happen pretty much simultaneously. Women started dying. And that got the attention. These were straight women who were dying of AIDS. Oh, well, that's something different. And then when Rock Hudson got sick, boy, that just brought it to the forefront. oh my gosh, because he had denied his homosexuality. I've got a quick little note on that. I once went to Rock Hudson's house and played cards with his wife, Phyllis Gates, when I was working in LA. And she said, yeah, this is the night I have you ladies come over and play cards because Rocco's out with the guys. And I thought that was interesting because she always denied that she knew that he was going out and playing with the guys. But anyway, that's what happens. For those of you who are too young to remember Rock Hudson, he was quite the dish at that time.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So here this AIDS epidemic started, and if you were gay, you could not donate blood. That meant lesbian. Here you have lesbian women who have never had sex with a man, probably, for quite a while or whatever, and they could have their blood tested, but they wouldn't even use it. So there was a group of people that were some of the best to give blood and to help. And Chris, could you say something about what happened with that group of people? This is when the sisters stood up for the brothers. And before that, there'd always been a little bit, oh, I don't know if I can trust you.
So I'll just read this thing.
Okay. Read it into the microphone.
Yeah, maybe.
And I'll just stand here while you have that.
So I'm going to read an excerpt from a larger publication I've written. And in it there's a long quote. You'll figure out which is the quote. While coming out was a wonderfully freeing feeling, throwing off what I perceived to be the rigid fetters of heterosexuality, my newfound sexual freedom coincided with a mysterious and horrific epidemic, which was first known as GRID, gay-related immune deficiency, and which it would eventually be renamed to acquired immune deficiency syndrome, or AIDS. In the straight communities where I worked, there was no conversation of any kind about this shameful problem with those other people. However, after 5 p.m., all the venues where I danced or dined or listened to music were filled with the rumblings of the killer disease. Over the next 10 years, wherever I turned in my community of women, news came fast and furious, ever increasingly shocking and devastating. Our gay brothers were dying by the dozens, the hundreds, and then the thousands. As I recall my first years in the general gay community, there was no place for women in the men's events. No one mixed. The absolute nature of the separation of the genders was deeply palpable. It first took some very courageous and principled women, primarily lesbians, working in the healthcare field to recognize the need for immediate attention to the men and to take up the mantle of caregiver to these ostracized and repudiated sufferers. I find this quote to be representative of how it was for the gay and lesbian communities in the first 10 years of the epidemic. Here begins the quote. In many a documentary about the modern gay rights movement in the US, the story goes something like this. In the 1970s, gay men and lesbians had little in common. Gay men wanted the freedom to wear assless chaps and have sex in parks without being harassed and arrested by cops. Lesbians, on the other hand, were tired of women's sexual objectification and wanted things like custody rights, equal pay, and to listen to folk music in women's coffee houses while holding hands. The divide was exacerbated by gay men's expectations that lesbians get the coffee during gay liberation meetings. But then in the 1980s, the devastating AIDS epidemic brought these strange bedfellows together. Lesbians saw that gay men were dying by the thousands without any recognition by the federal government. Outraged by this extreme homophobia and moved by their compassionate sensibilities, lesbians set aside their frustrations with gay men, becoming dedicated AIDS activists and caregivers. That's the end of the quote. I can remember the wry comment that was being murmured under our collective breath. How lucky for us that the gay men were affected first, because the lesbians rallied to care for them. It would have been a very different story had it been the other way around. Yet soon enough, women, lesbians, straight, prostitutes, wives, school teachers, and laborers were all swept up without distinction in this ravaging harvest by the Grim Reaper. Now it became paramount within our community to make a decision: pursue life as though we were teenagers and invincible, or grow up, clean up our act, and attend to our larger communities. I was fortunate to have access to a new way of living with a few new communities and some old traditions.
Thank you so very much. For those of you who weren't there, my brother was dying of AIDS, and I wanted to give blood. And they said, you can only give blood if you don't know anybody who's gay.
Oh my God.
Well, on the form it said, when,
And
are you affiliated with any?
Anybody who's homosexual.
Yeah,
And if you were, you couldn't give
Couldn't
blood.
even know them?
that's very true.
Right,
God.
right.
Yeah.
There was such fear.
Such fear.
I was giving
Come on,
blood.
stand up so people can hear.
I was giving blood at San Jose Hospital. No, it actually was by Santa Teresa. I would give blood every year.
You can't hear you back.
Okay. The questionnaire came, do you know somebody gay? Are you gay? There was such fear. People were put in the streets. It was a scary time.
Oh, yeah. No.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And as I said, for those of you who didn't go through that, it was such a time of you knowing that God loved you. Everybody knew that God loved you, but you're going, but God, why are you doing this? But it was a disease. It wasn't a reaction of any God energy. It was a disease. And it started so slowly. I met a gentleman up at the Russian River in Burnville who said, this was in 1978. I've been to the doctor and I don't know what's going on. I'm losing weight. And I eat and eat and eat and I've got a fever. And they don't know what's wrong with me. And I looked at him and I thought, I don't know. And he was really reaching out. And it was at a time that nobody knew.
Yeah,
And I mean, how frightening to realize that something's going on.
yeah.
And not knowing what's going on.
I-
Yes, David,
I lived it,
you lived it,
Yeah.
yeah?
and I'm a person, I'm living in days. I've had AIDS since 1985,
Yeah.
and I saw so many people diagnosed after me go,
Right.
and I'm still here. That tells me that I have a purpose.
At the height of the epidemic, men were dying in San
Yeah.
Francisco 180 a day.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's like, and for everybody to sit around and say they deserved it. But no, nobody deserves something like
How
that.
horrible it was for me was every day.
Yeah,
There were pages and pages of obits. It was,
it was horrible.
yes, it was, oh my God, I was so stigmatized by that. I mean, and I still am.
Oh, of course, it's not something you get over.
No.
But what happened is we have some people in our community, and I wish you were here today, that 25 years ago started the AIDS retreat. And that's for people HIV positive and their caregivers, and it's held here, and it'll be here next month. And that's from the Center for Living with Dying and our wonderful Reverend Dr. Janet Childs.
Yay.
And it's something that just has been, it keeps going because they're finding more and more people that are victims of that disease through not just having it, but having members of their family have died of it. Yes, Christine?
Actually, I forget the name of the organization, but it actually started at MCC.
Metropolitan Community Church.
Yeah, but we knew we couldn't do it in the church. And so, Bobby, who was our pastor's partner, spouse, went out of MCC, and several people were helped. Actually, working as a respiratory therapist, there, what was the worst thing was going to MCC, and every time we would hear somebody died, Ronnie actually stopped going to church because she couldn't handle all the deaths.
Right, yeah, it was very difficult. Yeah, take
I
one.
have a question. From the time the epidemic started, how long did it take before they actually realized that it was a virus?
Oh, they realized it was a virus because, for instance, my brother,
Wasn't there a long stretch of time
no,
before
not in
No.
California, because Stanford had done a study on gay men, and they were testing them for hepatitis. They went back and looked at that blood, and they had the immune deficiency in their blood, and that was in the early 70s. So we know they realized they were dealing with a virus, but they didn't know what it was.
And they didn't know how it was.
They didn't know how to deal with it or what.
Contagious.
But California really stepped up and did more than, California and New York, the ones that really stepped up. But it was a very difficult time. So, but on to a more positive note here. Yes, Mel?
I wanted to say it wasn't actually until the 90s when they actually started with treatment.
Treatment.
Right.
Well, they were giving some kind of cocktail in the late 80s.
Yeah.
It was just about killing people almost to death.
It was,
Yeah.
the cocktail was killing more people than that.
My best friend always said the day after I die, I'm going to come up with a treatment that will make this like diabetes, that we can live with. And the day after he died in '94, I heard on the radio about police inhibitors.
Right. And were you working in San Francisco at the time?
Not yet. I was
Yeah.
working in a factory in the valley, and I ended up moving up here and working in the hospital that treated my friend. He was the first one to move into the Shanty Palace when they had that in San Francisco.
Good. Yeah, thank you, Mel. Yeah, but it took a long time for them to really find. And there wasn't the federal funding until finally the federal government came in. Well, why do you all have a flag? Do you all have a little flag? There is a little flag? Yeah. Well, what does that stand for? When this was, after everybody was saying, look at Judy Garland and Somewhere Over the Rainbow, we need a symbol. And so Gilbert Baker, who was living in San Francisco, he came up with the idea we need a flag. And he lived in the Castro, and so he made a flag, and it had 8 colors, and it was the top color was pink. Now it's not. They found that duplicating pink just took too much money to do that. But anyway, but it has a symbol: red for life, orange for healing, yellow for sunlight, green for nature, blue for harmony and peace, and violet for spirit. So when you look at that, yes,
It's the chakra colors upside down.
right, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a rainbow. And so when you think of it, stands for something. And the 2 colors that were removed were the pink, which was for sex, and the turquoise, which was for art and magic. And,
Oh, they should have kept in the art
you
and
wish
magic
those 2 were
part.
still on there, that would be great. But they just couldn't be replicated as easily with those 2 colors. So that's why we have this. And then people started doing a parade. The Washington March was fantastic, and they decided that they were going to parade. The parade was more of a, we're here. And in fact, that's what they would chant. We're here, we're queer, get over it. Marching down Market Street. And it was one of those things that San Francisco still has one of the biggest parades, but it's about to be beat out by Sydney. Sydney, Australia, it really knows how to celebrate Pride, and they're coming up. Yes.
When is the parade in San Francisco?
This coming, not today, but next Sunday. Saturday is the Dyke March. They're, yeah. So if you want to, you got a flag, but it's quite an exciting thing. So you can watch it on TV, which is nice. They have nice coverage of it on TV. One of the things that I think David and Paul and Mel and Christine and we might be talking about is it's getting too commercial.
Yeah.
You know, when you've got the huge Apple contingent marching, it looks like everybody in Apple is marching in the parade now.
And everybody at Adobe
And
marches.
Adobe and Facebook and they have the Google, they all had these huge contingents, when before it used to be you could just, if you were a dyke on bike, you would just jump on your bike and lead it off, you know? And now they have changed all of this around. But it was a day of celebration, and people were saying, well, yeah, but they do this and they do that. They were making them wrong again by the way they were performing or acting. And I've never heard the same thing said about Mardi Gras or Carnival. There's too many beads and there's too many feathers. They don't say
Never.
that. They sure did about the gay pride. But when you if you get a chance, look at this celebration now. Celebrating the fact that, yes, we are here, and we are not going to go away. And I love that attitude. Whether you're gay, whether you're black, whether you're Asian, whatever you are, celebrate who you are. We have a pamphlet that we handed out this morning, and these are stories and articles from people that most of you know, probably. Everyone should have gotten one of these. Take it home and look at it. There are some interesting stories. Annie has one about her brother Jay. I have one about my brother Bart. Marianne Gallagher put in about her friend Dale. Ronnie's partner, Kevin, has he's the first story. And a friend of mine put in what it was like working for a gay boss. Sherry has one about her friend Eric. There's so many wonderful stories in here, but the one that I even wrote one, okay? And that's called Yes, I'm Bisexual. There really is such a thing. I hear people say, well, that just means you haven't made up your mind yet.
Or you haven't found the right one.
No, it's just who I am, don't worry about it. But, Simon, yeah.
I had a straight friend, I used to date him, who always said, sometimes I wish I were bi. It would double my chances.
Double your chances. And then we have an article in here about what it's like to be asexual, which I really appreciate. And then another one, not a boy, not a girl, in between and elsewhere entirely. There's some wonderful articles in here and stories about what people have gone through. And so take it home, look at it, give you a different viewpoint of what it's like to be encompassed more than you were when you were growing up. I don't know how many of you can remember the first time that somebody said, he's peculiar, or she's different. And I remember the first time I ever heard the word queer. This guy said, well, you know, he's one of those queer guys. And I thought, why do you have a limp wrist and your hand on your hip and you say queer? What's that mean? You know, I've never heard anything like that. And since then, I've seen so many stereotypical slams about people. Just like they say against black people, they've all got rhythm and they all can dance. Well, I want to tell you, I had a friend Byron who didn't have any rhythm.
To save his life.
But he was wonderful, but was not one of those stereotypical things. But you hear about that. You hear about if you're German, you've got a bad temper, or if you're Italian, you have, you know,
If you're
they
Jewish, you're good at
you're
math.
Jewish, or you're good at math, or you like money, or whatever. We have all these stereotypical things. But the reason we had Amina come and talk about Ramadan was we want people to find out about other people's life. I mean, when you talk about being Muslim, talk about people who are stereotyped. And we talked about Jews, and we talked about, why do you think it's okay to make fun of somebody else? Why do you think just because they're not quite what you are that it's okay? So for this week and this coming weekend, if you can think about that, think about God loves everybody. God gave us the rainbow. Yeah, Mr. Baker opted for it, for the symbolic gay community. I see now they're saying don't wear a rainbow shirt because people will think you're gay. So,
So,
Yeah.
so
I get asked two things, am I a deadhead or am I gay?
if you're a deadhead or if you're gay. Chrissy?
Actually, I was down in Slovak.
You still have to turn around, or you're just gonna talk to
Okay,
me?
I was down in Slovak,
So,
and they were having a fundraiser, and there were these guys that had orange shirts and orange pants. Well, back in the day, you would never see men in pink
Colors.
or orange or lavender.
Blue, green, black.
Yep,
Is it?
they had to be blue, gray, black,
Or brown.
brown.
Brown, yeah.
It is so wonderful that you can show your true colors.
Okay. Yes, Mel?
I inherited a really wonderful rainbow umbrella from my nephew, because my brother heard it in San Francisco and won every day.
Oh, no.
So, but I have a really nice umbrella.
That's great. I wanted you to notice this is there's wonderful colors now that we have for transgenders.
the turquoise and the pink.
And so it's baby blue, it's baby pink, and the white, and that's the transgender flag. And that's wonderful with the pastels. Yeah.
Friday is the transgender march.
Friday's the transgender march. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, some of you have some sayings that you might want to share. Annie, I love yours. Where did you go?
I love mine too. Can I go?
Yeah.
Okay. It all makes sense now. Gay marriage and marijuana being legalized on the same day. Leviticus 20:13. If a man lays with another man, he should be stoned. We've just been interpreting it wrong all these years.
Dr. Eileen?
From Ellen. Do we have to worry about who's gay and who's straight? Can't we just love everybody and judge them by the car they drive?
Anybody else have one they want to share? Yes, Tamara?
Maxwell Barrett. Of course I dress well. I didn't spend all the time in the closet for nothing.
Anybody else? Yes, Margaret.
For as long as the power of America's diversity is diminished by acts of discrimination and violence against people just because they are black, Hispanic, Asian, Jewish, Muslim, or gay, we still must overcome.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, very good. Who wrote that?
Ron Kind.
Oh,
Yeah.
great, good one. Anybody else have one? I don't know where all they went, but yes. Jen?
I've got another one from Ellen. I'm not gonna stand up.
No blame.
Jan had surgery last week.
I was raised around heterosexuals, as all heterosexuals are. That's where us gay people come from. You heterosexuals.
Okay. Yes, Paul.
I have one, it's from a quote by Marilyn Monroe. I know I'll never be happy, but I know I can be gay.
Paul, you have one?
David, or fall.
Oh, I'm sorry, David, I'm sorry.
The other half.
The other half.
Okay. I am God's creation, my parents' decoration, the youth of the nation, empowered by my friends' motivation. I'm proud of being me.
Oh, I love that.
Isn't that great?
That's a great one. Sean's birthday was a couple of weeks ago, and I gave him a birthday card. And just like I did with David, I called him Seth. So I wrote on the birthday card, Seth, and drew a line through it. Stephen, drew a line through it. Bill, and drew a line through it. And a couple of other names that I've called him, during church, and then in big capital letters I wrote Seth. So no.
Seth.
I mean Sean. Thank you. See what happens? My brain. He says he knew me in a past life listening to stuff. So think about it. The Bible doesn't tell. Yeah, did you want to read one, Marie? Go Games. Stand up. What does it say?
Keep calm and love who you want.
Keep calm and love who you want.
Awesome. Good advice.
I think that really is good advice.
I like it.
And how many of you heard Ronnie singing when you came in? Yeah. And as I said, we have his CD for free if you want a copy, if you don't have one. I am so proud to be wearing this stole. This stole was made for me by Chad, Reverend Chad, who was an MCC minister. And Chad was born with Patricia, and was very, very lucky to have written Patricia's bio about. Well, she was 60 years old when she decided to go in and have surgery and start the testosterone shots and to become a man. But this is one of the strangest things. She said, Dottie, before I'm 65, I want to have testicles. I said, good for you, I'm supportive of anything, except when he walked into my office and said, Dottie, you want to see? I said, no. But he was a wonderful seamstress and made this stole for me when I was 18. And
I think it's a tailor if it's a man.
Okay, he made it before he transitioned.
Oh, then it's seamstress, right?
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Isn't that weird, that we have different names?
Masseur, masseuse.
Yeah, and so, but I was so thrilled, and every time I look at the rainbow, I think of a chat.
Yeah. You know what? That's the wonderful part about it, is that you're thinking about him as a person and not that gay person.
That gay person.
You know, that's wonderful. I love that.
Are you ready? Dr. Irene, first of all, we need to pass the basket.
Pass the basket.
So if you could do that,